My name is Dara Messenger. I'm Director of Programming here. I'm not related to Ruth Messenger, even though I wish I was. Just want to clarify that. And now onto the show. We are absolutely thrilled to be screening the New York theatrical premiere of The Five Demands. I think it's really important to have films about extremely local issues, and this is about something that happened right here in our very city that is more salient than ever. We're going to have a Q&A directly following the screening with directors Greta Schiller and Andrea Weiss. I'd like to invite up Andrea and Greta to say a few words.
Hi, everyone. Greta, do you want to come up? Okay, just me. I'm going to be really brief because I know you want to see the film, not listen to me. So just want to say welcome to everyone. It's so exciting for us to have this week-long run, especially at Firehouse Cinema, which we love. Thank you. And if you enjoy the film tonight, please tell your friends and family because it's going to be running through the 20th. And they're sold out tomorrow night, but there are a lot of shows where there's still tickets available. And don't get up at the end because, as Dara said, we're going to have a really interesting discussion afterwards. So thanks for coming. Thank you. We want to invite Charles Powell from the film and Javier Garcia, who's going to be our moderator tonight, and Jeff Gurock is in the audience. Please join us. You have to turn this.
There we go. Oh, wow. Okay. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. My name is Javier Garcia. I also go by Professor Garcia. I do teach at CCNY. I'm a professor in the Media and Communication Arts program. I'm also a two-time CCNY graduate. I've also served as the president of the Communications Alumni Group, part of the Alumni Association of CCNY. Shout outs to them for also sponsoring this evening's program. Just quick show of hands, how many of you are CCNY graduates? All right, pretty full house. It's exciting to be up here, but also just to hear everyone's voices. I would love to make this a little bit more of a participatory session. So if at any point folks have questions, start to kind of jot them down in your heads. I do have a couple questions just to start us off, but I'd also love to see folks in the audience. So I'll be getting some steps in after watching the movie. So with that said, I'd love to open with just a couple quick questions. I know, we're watching this film largely in the context of recent events. But what I'd love to kind of start is I know that this has been an ongoing effort. This has been something that Andrea, Greta, you've both been working on this for a while and just capturing the significance of this moment. So I'd love to kind of get just a little bit of a behind the scenes background perspective and the original inspiration of wanting to capture this from your very unique perspectives.
Well, is this working? Yeah. We were at a book signing of a book Andrew wrote, Paris Was a Woman, and a guy came up to buy the book, and Andrew said, "You look familiar," and he said, "You look familiar," and he said, "I have a great idea for a film." And we both were like, "Oh yeah, everybody has a great idea for a film. You make that film." And then Andrew was like, "Well, he teaches at City," so she had lunch with him, and he told her the story. He's like, "Oh my God, I went to City College. I enrolled in 1974, open admissions, free tuition, and I knew nobody ever talked about it. It was totally had been. I guess white men write the history, and they had written this history out." So that's where we first got the idea. And that man was Shelley Weinbaum, who appears in the film. He was a young physics professor who supported the strike. He was untenured at the time. He almost got fired for supporting the strike.
Wow.
So he was, and he stayed at activists. He was here the other night. Anyway, that's how it got. That was the germ of how it started.
Yeah, and I am not, unfortunately, a City College alum, but I have been teaching there for 20 years, and I had never heard of this story either, and it didn't just kind of. I mean, the reason I think Greta and I both responded so strongly to it, partly we had been working together, making films since the mid '80s, and we had made a lot of films about kind of erased or forgotten, chapters of history. Usually it's often women's history or African American history or LGBTQ history, and we have a whole body of work that deals with that. But when we heard about this, we're both just intensely, I don't know what other word to use, but patriotic about City College. So it really struck us. Everybody knows about the middle-class white student protest movement against the war, primarily white and primarily middle class. And here was the story of students who did something that had actually a far bigger impact. And it was homegrown in Harlem, and it had this national impact. So we jumped on it.
I think
Almost every person who worked on the film went to City College, mostly through Andrea's program. One person here, Octavia Warnock-Graham, stand up. Director of photography. That's why everybody looks so good.
Okay. Jeff wanted to.
No, I just wanted to say that one of the problems with the forgetting about what happened in '69 was the fact that in 1970 there's a second incident or movement on campus, and that's Cambodia, which is a national outpouring of anger by students. And City College, once again, was in the leadership of that sort of thing. And these two events, which are comparable but independent of one another, often conflated with that situation. Moreover, the differences on campus between the activists, black and white, the activists opposed on the white side, and the large number of white students, and I'll be honest, including myself, who are not engaged one way or the other, begins in 1969 and it's reflected in 1970. You showed some pieces of white students fighting the black students. Well, you had on campus in 1970 the Young Americans for Freedom, very supportive of President Nixon at that point. They're also on campus. So I think one of the things that has to be indicated is the multiplicity of identities among the white students. I think most white students in 1969 were supportive of the idea. Whether we'll go and do anything about it is another step which most white students were not prepared to do. And I said in the film, what were we interested in? We were supportive of the idea, but we were also careerists. Mundane interests, which had always been the hallmark of the students who went to City College. So what I want to indicate constantly is diversity of opinion within the white community, both in '69 and in 1970. And by the way, I've written on the history of City College back in the 1930s, and you had the same breakdown. You had leftist activists, you had students who didn't care or were busy with their activities. And did you know that before World War II, the largest ROTC group in the United States was at City College? So keep all those things in mind when you deal with a very important year, 1969, but it's part of a national movement and an era where all these things took place.
No, I think that's a great point. And we've heard the word perspective and kind of just touched on that in a couple different areas. I think, Charles, I'd love to get your perspective. I mean, as someone who was so integral to this kind of moment, I'd kind of hijack this since I do have the mic. I'd love to know what that decision-making sort of organizing process looked like among the Committee of 10 kind of how you all recruited one another, and kind of just give us a sense of what that sort of strategy development looked like over the course of those really tense moments. I'd love to just get your thoughts and take that where you may, please.
So thank you. I'm so glad that you said the things that you said, because it was so diverse. When you look at even those who supported us, there are some unrecognized heroes from this film. Professors, that were really working for him. One in particular, his name was Alfred Conrad. Alf Conrad, was that champion who wrote the open, precursor to open admissions, which was really our demand on equity in terms of admissions. But Alf, is not with us today, so thank you for sharing. So perspective, I always say, this is now my 7th time watching the film, and every time I find something different. So I said tonight, as I was sitting back there with my wife, to myself, I said, I'm going to acknowledge the New York City Police Department, because if it wasn't for their undercover surveillance footage, much of this film wouldn't be able to be done. I was like amazed, Every time I look, I'm saying like, wait a minute, that was undercover surveillance footage, my arrest, undercover surveillance footage, when I was in front of the building that night, undercover surveillance footage. So thank you, NYPD. Thank you, J. Edgar Hoover. Thank you, COINTELPRO. Thank you, the FBI, but not, and Andrea, who's an archivist, and Greta wouldn't have been able to do this film. I remind people that we stand on mighty shoulders. The shoulders of Al Ballard, the shoulders of all of those incredible things. One of my favorite people, I love that juxtaposition, from that young lady, as me, stood up in front of that college and fought those guys, and then, you saw the next scene, and she's really just such a beautiful human being. So we have a lot to be grateful for, but a lot of work still to do. I'm a CCNY alum. I'm proud to be an alumni of the City College of New York. I'm proud to have gone and walked those hallways and doing whatever. We struggled for something that we felt was worth it. A degree from one of the greatest colleges and universities in the history of colleges and universities. But you alum were, and by the way, I'll just make a little sidebar. You were smart enough in the most recent situation to give my dear sister Francie Covington the Townsend Harris Medal. I was there for her to receive it. I haven't gotten mine, but so that's okay. But no, we stood on many, many different, and it was a struggle. I just wanted to say one of the things in perspective, don't ever forget, we were 19-year-olds. We were kids, and we had to grow up really quick overnight. And that's why I'm saying we stood on, your comments about St. Nicholas Terrace, your things about perspective. You helped me put things into perspective from a different, viewpoint. And you're right, 1970 was not only Kent State, but it was Jackson State. And we had to witness those things where the militarization of what happened on college campuses. So let's give, Buell Gallagher a round of applause to be able to say that he held, to integrity, and he didn't resign because he didn't want to be there anymore. He could have been a president of that college for 20, 30, 40 years, but he resigned on principle. We had reached agreement. It was no open admissions. We had actually had an agreement on what would have been a 25-year transition, that would have allowed us to get up to that 50%. We were not talking about just slam away all of the, things that we wanted to be a part of our degree. We didn't want no reduced, value of degrees, which was what happened for many of those students who said, it's open admissions. Anybody can get into, anybody can graduate. Well, no, that wasn't necessarily the case. They admitted them, but they weren't graduating them. But at the same time, we wanted the best. I said that in the film. We wanted a City College of New York degree, the same one that they were giving out in the 20s and the 30s and the 50s and the 60s, and the ones that we could look at, because we had pride. We knew the people that went to City College. I grew up looking at that college campus and saying to myself, one day I can do that. I can be there. And so we wanted the best. So I don't want to go on, but, and I wanted other people to share. But those are some of my perspectives.
But can I just add one little thing? Sorry. I see we all want to talk. But you told us a wonderful story the other night at dinner about how they didn't expect to stay for 3 days. They thought they were going to stay a few hours and be symbolic. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, what are we going to do now? So tell what you did. It was amazing.
Well, yeah, I said that in the film. We really thought this would be symbolic. We had already done, we had done that with the administration building, and that lasted a couple of hours. And then all of a sudden, I can say, I didn't talk about this at dinner the other night, but the reality was the community responded. So all of a sudden, we realized that those people that live right across on St. Nicholas Terrace and Convent Avenue, who had never had the audacity to even walk across that street and go into those hollowed walls in campus, we opened up the doors to them, and they said, oh, we like this, so you ain't going nowhere. So they stood and protected us. Buell Gallagher was a reality in doing that. Basil Patterson, our elected officials, Percy Sutton, Charlie Rangel, and others who came, and our mothers and our fathers who said, if you come for them, you come for us. So the community stood up. But we weren't ready for that, which is why I said the other night at dinner, we trying to figure it out. You saw me thrust out there. I was that one who stood and said that very nervous statement. And they didn't even know who I was, in the film. And that, you saw that scene where it was raining, there was umbrellas. That was the night of the takeover. And somebody just came up to me and said, okay, so you're our spokesman now. Spokesman? I've never had a conversation with media, press, or doing whatever. And that's how we developed those assignments. James Small then said, okay, you're going to be head of security. And James took to that. You could see that's who James was. The rest of us was trying to find our way. So that was really what the situation was.
I have so many things to say, but I'll try to be brief, okay? First of all, you rhapsodized about City College in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and those of us who are proud of City College, and we all are, think about the Nobel Prize winners. But the dropout rate of the white students during that time period was extraordinarily high as they left the college for work during the Depression, during the war, etc. So when people talk about, well, these students came in, they dropped out, that's also a tradition at City College for the longest time, okay? So what I'm constantly saying in my work is diversity, diversity, diversity. There's no one Jewish opinion, and there's no one black opinion on all these types of things.
Thank you. We mentioned storytelling quite a bit and some of your perspectives. So I'm actually going to bring this question back over to Andrea and Greta because there's a number of sort of powerful pieces and content, and I was looking at the credits, and I feel like maybe like a quarter of it was just the archives and the different sources of the footage that you pursued. I know we mentioned that there's probably a lot of stuff that's on the cutting room floor, so I'm kind of just curious.
Love it, Jeff.
I'm curious what sort of elements, if we were to do the extended cut, would you include on your sort of retake on this? Because I think there's so many things that you found that maybe you weren't able to include or that, just inspired you in different ways. So I'm curious just what kind of comes to mind with that.
Well, there are things that were in, there were a lot of, I don't know if you were bored and looking at your watch, you might have noticed that we don't even mention the 5 demands till almost a half hour into the film, and we don't mention the takeover till later, even later. And so we felt this really big responsibility to contextualize the story. Not just contextualize it in terms of, all the different political movements that were going on and the sort of shift between the civil rights movement and Black Panthers, or Black Power movement, and not just, what was happening globally, but also why this kind of mythology that we grow up with as Americans about meritocracy it doesn't really work for huge sections of the population, because the playing field is so uneven from the beginning. The structural racism is so strong, especially within the educational system. And we felt if we didn't build that up and explain why Black and Puerto Rican students weren't being admitted into the college through the regular entrance program, a lot of people watching the film would think, yeah, I'm in favor of diversity, but everyone's got to come in the same door, or have that attitude. And we wanted to make sure we clarified why this idea of meritocracy is one of those American dream myths that we've grown up with and really isn't valid. What we do have, though, we have a lot of like, for example, Jeff's interview that he commented was not in the film. We would really like to consolidate some of these interviews and make them available for researchers. There's a lot of information. That's what
Anyway,
we would love, is that if they showed it at 74 minutes and spent the other 15 minutes, made an hour and a half, talking about why this is relevant today.
I think let's talk a little bit about the archive research. As Charles noted, the police surveillance footage, which thank God Andrea found through the through what
Was it freedom of?
Yeah, well, a few years ago, just really briefly, any filmmakers in the audience should know this. A few years ago, not a few years, a few decades ago, there was a lawsuit that that required the all of that footage to be declassified, because it was, top secret. It was declassified and made accessible to the American people. So it's the New York City Police Department footage is, because of this lawsuit, is at the Museum of the City of New York. And technically, we are not supposed, it should be free and accessible to all of us. You have to pay technical, reproduction costs and stuff like that, but it's in the public domain.
I mean, again, going back to why we did like 20 minutes on, we also wanted to have a little bit of who the people were who took part in the struggle. Everybody didn't come in through the SEEK program. Rosalind and her brother came in through regular admissions. Jeff came in through regular admissions. Like, there are many ways of the people who got to the campus. Like Francie says it so beautifully. Well, everything she says is said beautifully. But she says, they just, people in Harlem just wanted the same thing that everyone else wants for their kids. And so you go to the traditional news archives and you look for 60s Harlem, you get prostitutes, drug addicts, murders, every kind of crime. None of the actual people's lives. So Andrea found a photography collective that were taking pictures at that time, and she read, because when we're into a project, we see things, take things from everywhere. She read an obituary of one of the photographers, and she said, oh wow, I gotta find these photographs. And she went, and it wasn't cataloged yet. She went down to the Library of Congress and went through the boxes. So those gorgeous photographs of the kids and the
ones at the beginning of the film with the
girl.
hydrant.
That's all from photographers who were living and working in Harlem, and the New York Times and Time and these places were not buying their photographs.
Wow, that's powerful, and I appreciate the amount of work and energy and time and research that went into bringing this moment to life. I just want to do a quick time check. Do we have like a hard close? Okay. Because I do have one last question before I do want to open it up to the floor, which before we started the session here, one of my thoughts in just kind of building some of these questions was really, the everyone's heard the phrase, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And so I'm so glad that we're able to share this piece of film and just kind of capture the lessons here. Of course, we're living in a wildly different time. The fragmentation of media, fragmentation of communities, the Supreme Court decision. I'm kind of curious if we can just add a layer of perspective from each of your different points of view now. What sort of lessons should we be taking away? I mean, I know we have a room of, CCNY graduates, maybe some activists, filmmakers, storytellers in their own right. What should we take away and how should we contextualize the moment now that we've watched the film and now that we're here today?
Privilege has no end. Privilege has no end and repeats itself generation by generation. So we're living through that type of era now. When they talk about legacies getting into colleges and people with money getting into colleges and poor not, it sound, of course, we didn't have any rich people going to City College, but the idea of privilege is something we have to confront and deal with and understand. And by the way, as a freshman at City College, my first poli-sci course was taught by Professor Alan Ballard, who I just heard is still alive at age 92. So he doesn't remember me, but I remember him. And it was the first time I was in a class where the professor smoked cigarettes. It was so strange for a little boy who's 17, 18 years of age. And Alan Ballard was a terrific teacher. At the same time that he was running the SEEK programs, who is also teaching within the standard curriculum of City College, which makes him more than just an activist, a fine scholar, which is what City College also produces. And sadly, at the same time, you have Howard Adelson and Copeland, who they said had the social sophistication of a Neanderthal, and that was part of the scene at City College. And we mourned the fact that President Gallagher was pushed out of office and replaced by Copeland, who had no sensitivity to anyone. And can I say one other thing, which is very Jewish, and that is, most people don't know this, that out of the push for black studies at City College, there emerged a Jewish studies program which really didn't exist prior to that time. City College had a long history of attracting Jewish students, although most Jews did not go to college, but had no sensitivity to the ethnic and religious background of students. We learned from you and developed a Jewish studies program. When I was at City College, there was only one course in Jewish history, which I got an A in the course. And I met my wife in the course. Not a bad deal. Anyway.
Well, if James Small were here, he could tell us. I'll mangle it if I try. But the creation of Jewish studies was part of the deal to get black studies. He made a deal. City College got both the same moment.
There was a woman here the other night. Remember were you on that panel? I get mixed up now. An Asian woman who said, she said to James, "Oh, we followed you. We learned from you how to take over a building and demand Asian studies at City College." So that's quite sweet. Well, the thing is, I think a lot about historical trends, and I always, as I like to say, history is not linear. It's not like it just gets better and better. It ebbs and flows, and things change all the time. And the Black Liberation Movement's been going on since the Emancipation Proclamation, and every time get a few steps forward, there's always a pushback, and that happens. But I think that the pushback is getting stronger in general, in certainly in young people. They're not taking any of it. And to paraphrase Jeff, the mundane aspiration, vote. Who we vote into office really matters. So for example, there's a movement now to make CUNY free again, to make it tuition free again. And there's a coalition forming around that. So everybody should get on that mailing list. So when the city council and the state allocate money, they are always trying to cut CUNY. It's a constant struggle.
So my perspective is, and I'm glad that's an excellent question. I know that every showing that I'm going to, especially the ones that we did it in Princeton, we did it in Boston, and there were young people. got a lot of old heads, including myself here for this one, but there are some young people. I'm very hopeful. I think that, that you never, ever, ever lose the ability to get it right, and you can put things into perspective. I mean, this movie is going to allow people, as you pointed out, to have a better understanding, really. I'm so glad that you've shared, on this panel, because we don't want one perspective. So I think, I mean, my 13-year-old, soon to be 14-year-old grandchild was here on Sunday, and her crew, and then there were others, and I guarantee you that this ain't over. I think we can get it right. I mean, I think we can really, really, seasons. I believe in seasons, right? Everything has its season. And I happen to believe I've been very hopeful over these, even with Trump and all the rest of it. I think, we deal with the fact that I deal with elected politics, and there's a saying that all politics are local. I'm not concerned about what the Supreme Court has done. I'm concerned about what your block association is doing, more than I'm concerned about that. And I'm on my community board. We're doing some really, really creative and constructive things. I actually think that, how many people like Vincent Boudreau? I like Vince. I think that, he's got the ability to learn. And I think that the fact that I just found out, by the way, I taught 20 years in the Black Studies Department. I taught a course called Racism and the American Legal System, and I heard we're going to get our department back. And I'm already, saying to Vince Boudreau that I expect to be brought back, to teach that. You remember, you talk about Jewish things. Remember, it was, right, the 90s. Joseph Fleming's widow, who brought the case, against the City College and City University when Leonard Jeffries was taken out of the chairmanship of the Black Studies Department. We brought a federal lawsuit. We won at the United States District Court. We won in the United States Circuit Court of Appeals. And guess who reversed that? Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas reversed that decision, and Leonard Jeffries did not get back his chairmanship. And as a result, James Small and I did not get renewed by the college to be adjuncts. So I expect to get back. The fact of the matter is, there's a new day, there's a new opportunity. There's you and us, and together, we still can get this to be set straight and set right.
All right. So with that, I'd love to open to the floor.
Okay, great film. I didn't know a lot of it. I wondered why it became open admissions. I saw, the interview where she said something about the money, the disinvestment by Rockefeller or whatever was happening, but it still wasn't clear to me after the
Well,
five demands were.
It's not clear because we didn't really go into it in the film, because that's not what they were asking for. The students
Right,
did
and
not want open admission, but the Board of Regents, who has the final word, they had some very, they had secret meetings. We don't even know. Those meetings are secret. But Charles and I are of the opinion that it was kind of a trap. Because once you open the door to everyone and you don't give them any money, enough money to to run a school correctly, then you're creating failure. And I mean, I might be a conspiracy theorist, but I don't think I am, because I do think that people sit in rooms and go, okay, they're getting too much power. How can we stop them? I don't think it's an accident that they do that.
No, I
And I yes. Oh. Oh, I was there when tuition was imposed. Yep. The first 2 years I went free, the next 2 years I got tapped. But yeah.
But
Anyway.
I think, like, for our purposes as the filmmakers, I mean, there could have been, I was talking earlier about the narrative arc. This would have turned into a really long, shaggy dog story if we started going into open admissions, which we definitely did not want to have happen. But we decided at a certain point that we needed to make it clear that this was not what the students were demanding, and it was terribly underfunded. But we tried to kind of take the long view of history and say, even with all of its flaws, it opened the door to higher education for people of color, and there was no closing that door again, you know, when it stopped in 1995.
Okay, thank
Just
you.
wanted to. I think that's a great point. I think that the thing that worries me most about the movie, which I love and I absolutely adore these two, ladies. I mean that was the fact that there's no clear answer for what you were just really saying. We walked into, and that's why I used the gentleman Alfred Conrad. Alfred Conrad was a Nobel-nominated economist. We walked into, you heard Basil Patterson say it, that we were better prepared than they were. Why? Because we had the resources, we had the people. That faculty and others came to support us, and they were phenomenal. Because don't forget, you're talking about the City College of New York. You're talking about one of the best educational institutions in the world. And so we walked into, the negotiations with the demand on our admission strategy. It was this thick. It was binders. And what was that? It was a progressive kind of program that the City College of New York, imagine if they adopted, we actually had it targeted geographically, that the City College of New York would adopt a certain number of high schools. Hunter College would adopt a certain number of high schools. Brooklyn College would adopt a certain number of high schools. You get my point? Queens College would adopt a certain number of high schools. Why was that? Because we had the resources that we could elevate what Henry Arce said, the ability for people to pass those exams, to be able to pass the Stuyvesant exam. Over the years, that adoption process would have translated into those high schools becoming more supportive of the middle schools, and those middle schools becoming more supportive of the elementary schools and the pre-K, and ultimately 25 years later, you wouldn't need open admissions or a special admissions program because everybody was getting the benefit of what was missing, and what we really, and I understand what you were saying, Professor, because that's not a fair depiction. There were a lot of good teachers out there trying to get in those elementary schools without resources and poor conditions of buildings with mold and rats and doing whatever to teach our children. But that was not our plan. Our plan was 25 years to bring about, a progressive kind of situation where at the end of the day, you didn't have to worry. You can close your eyes and just say, I'm going to pick the best students. From Benjamin Franklin High School on 116th Street and the FDR, which is 100% black, George Washington High School, those are the colleges that the City College would have adopted. And so in bringing those resources to the city, that's what Rockefeller said. Oh, that's your plan. Oh, hell no. We don't want, as you said, we don't want any of our immigrant, poor, it wasn't just us that they didn't like. They didn't like Jews. They didn't like Italians. They didn't like, we know the history, right? Racism as classism and sexism, all of that is combined into one, kind of like real reality. So when you're fighting against that, you're fighting against one, you're fighting against all three. Amen? So all we're really saying is that wasn't our plan. It's frustrating to see them dangle this open admissions thing out there and hold us responsible for bringing that about. Very frustrating. So thank you for that question.
Now, in the same way that Shelley Weinbaum pitched an idea to us, we're pitching it back to you. Somebody can make a film about open admissions or write the history of the book.
Do it.
Somebody needs to do that. It's never really been properly done. But I need to say something about the guy who talks about how diversity of thought and when you get different people coming together. If you read your alumni magazine like I do, you'll see that the valedictorian this year is that next woman whose double majored in one of her majors was Jewish studies. So you get this cross fertilization of interest, which is.
I gave a lecture.
Microphone.
I gave a lecture at City College last year. There's a course on the history of the Jews of Harlem, and there's not a single Jewish student in the class. So that tells you something about it's fabulous, and it's very interesting.
My name is Jane Tillman Irving, and I was part of the 3%, class of 69. Hunter College High School, gifted programs, all that. And I knew what was going on at City College because I rode my tricycle in front of the statue of Alexander Webb and around Abraham Lincoln's bust when it was in front of Shepherd Hall. And I just find it amazing that all these people are talking about, we didn't know what was going on. I find that almost impossible to believe. It is so entirely outside my experience and the experience of, all right, the other 3%, perhaps we were 3% of students in day session. I did some reporting when I was a reporter at WCBS Radio, and the major recipients and beneficiaries of open admissions, I think statistically, were Italian men. That's something that should be mentioned as well and discussed. It still was not the people for whom it ostensibly was created.
First of all, I just wanted to stand up. You were a hero of ours. When you went on with a friend of mine named Jerry Mondesire, and you went into Columbia's, the journalism program, and, I think you were part of that. He used to talk about you all the time. Anyway, but I'm just simply saying you were one of those people that my sister, was also one of that 3%. So I didn't go through the SEEK program, although I wanted to, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we always recognize your contributions.
Jane, I don't think we make the claim that everybody came in through the SEEK program. Rosalind, who's in the film, did not come in through the SEEK program, but the opening, Charles did not, but the opening quote before the film starts is that in the mid-'60s, before the SEEK program, City College was 97% white. So we cannot tell people's individual stories. We're telling about trends. If it hadn't been for the SEEK program, there's no way there would have been a population on campus of students of color large enough to occupy 17 buildings. Okay, so we're telling kind of a story, and there are individual stories that they're going to inevitably be left out of that. But from the very beginning, Greta and I had the idea that this isn't our story. We were creating a kind of platform for the activists who took over the campus to tell their story. And so we, those are the stories that are told in the film. It's from the perspective of the, representatives of that group of people is the overarching perspective.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Show of hands. Thank you. Okay. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
I think that concludes our program. Thank you.